Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Always Inspection Ready, Mastering FDA Inspection Preparation and Response, presented by American Pharmaceutical Review magazine and sponsored by Regulatory Compliance Associates, a Nelson Labs company. My name is Mike Auerbach. I'm the editor-in-chief of American Pharmaceutical Review magazine, and I'll be the moderator during today's presentation. In this webinar, you'll learn how to prepare your facility, teams, and documentation to meet FDA expectations during inspections from ex-FDA investigators. Understand how to manage unannounced and remote inspections and respond effectively to 483s and warning letters, and gain practical strategies for internal audits, contamination control, and aligning with current FDA guidance. In addition, this event will hold a live question and answer session at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, click on the Ask a Question tab on the right side of your screen. Please take note the right side of your screen also features an overview of this webinar and more information regarding our speakers. If you have a technical question during the event, click the Test Your Connection button at the bottom of your screen. From there, you can access additional webinar support. Finally, we encourage you to use the social media widgets beneath the webinar to share with your friends and colleagues. Our panel of speakers today includes Anita Michael. She's an executive pharma compliance expert and principal consultant at RCA, and Stephen Lin, executive principal consultant, pharma and biologics at RCA. Anita and Michael, we look forward to your presentation.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're well today. Name's Stephen Lin, as Mike already said. We're going to talk to you today, as you see from the slides in front of us, about always being inspection ready. Mastering FDA inspection prep and readiness and response. So let's dive right in. Just go over a quick kind of agenda of what we're going to look at. Talk about some current state of affairs. Talk a little bit about some background information. Then get down into the nitty gritty. What's inspection readiness? How to prepare. Talk about actually getting in the inspection. Get into the Form 482, the 483. Hopefully you don't get one, but if you get one, how to think, how to deal with it, and ultimately, how the agency will make some final decisions on the outcome of that inspection. And then we'll wrap it up with some kind of hot topics just to kind of seed your thought on some things that are going on right now. Hopefully, help you think through them better for yourself or in your company. So let's start with the current state of affairs. So as you know, during the COVID years, inspections, amongst many other things in our world, came to a grinding halt. And the agency, unfortunately, is still dealing with that lingering effect of delays, especially on inspections. Of course, on the domestic side, they've ramped up their inspections, but the foreign site backlog is still real. I mean, there's still delays in place. Are they doing inspections? Absolutely. They're doing a lot more than they have in years and years and years. They're catching up. I think we're getting there. But pre-approval and pre-license inspections, applications that they're in for new products or a change to an application still appear to be one of the main priorities. Another big thing that's going on is unannounced inspections for both foreign and domestic sites. Now, of course, as we all know, domestic has always been mostly unannounced. But on foreign, there's been, forays into it and out of it over the past, decade or so. But the commissioner made the announcement in early 2025 that they want to do many, many more foreign unannounced inspections. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next year or so, and see where that goes. And again, it leads into our, colleagues around the world always being inspection ready, as the saying goes. And how do you do that? And we're going to talk more about that during this presentation. Another topic, increased use of investigative tools. Specifically, think about remote regulatory assessments. Now, the agency has some guidance out on this. If you haven't seen it, please check it out on the website. Remember, these are not considered inspections per se, but they can be used as a precursor to an actual on-site inspection. Agencies definitely made good use of this during the pandemic years, and they're continuing to use it because it actually helps make their job a little bit more efficient, and some could argue effective as well. Mutual recognition agreements. Those probably are mostly with the EU and other regulatory partners of the FDA globally. It helps to relieve some inspection burden because they can use the foreign and health authorities inspects and potentially in place of their own. But again, it's only for certain countries and certain product types. If you want more information on that, the agency has a good deal of information in either guidance documents or on their website around that. And I think, more so now than ever, I think, especially on the medical product side of the FDA, where things have gone into various, specialty areas like the pharmaceutical inspectorate, you got the device and then, of course, the biologics and veterinary meds and so forth and BIMO. I think inspections are getting much more deep and much more rigorous. So being prepared for that and knowing that when an investigator or investigators show up at your front door, you're going to have a pretty darn tough inspection. So always being ready for that. So let's start out. FDA inspections, some basic information. So FDA inspects manufacturers of processes processes manufacturers of regulated products to verify that they comply with relevant regulations. So you see those inspected include, and we give you a whole bunch of different things from vaccine and drug manufacturers, blood banks, 503B compounders, all the way down to food processing, dairy farmers, on and on and on and on. And down at the border, at the bottom, imported regulated products at the border. So FDA is works very closely with U.S. Customs and Border Protection at various, all the most of the border stations, and does a lot of inspections around regulated products. Again, FDA also inspects clinical trials, also laboratories that conduct studies in animals or microorganisms, and on and on and on. All kinds of different inspections. One point to take home on this one is they conduct several types of inspections that help for consumers, specifically pre-approval inspections, or that's for drugs, or pre-license inspections on the biologic side. It's usually, when a company submits an application to market a new product. And then they have routine inspections of regulated facilities. Now this goes into where the FDA has kind of on the drug side of the house, site selection model based on risk, how they prioritize, who they inspect, when they inspect, how often they inspect. An example of that is, a sterile facility would probably get it more frequent inspection versus maybe a company making topical products. Now, there's all kinds of different factors that weigh into that. But again, the FDA has some information on their website for that as well, if you're more interested. The next one is for cause inspections. This is when the FDA gets some kind of signal, whether it be an adverse event report, maybe a recall or something. They have some signals that's come in that they where they determine they need to go out and do an inspection. So there is a cause to do the inspection. And that, could also involve, believe it or not, they show up and they start an inspection for a specific issue, but then they open it up to a regular kind of inspection, whether that be a GMP inspection, a good clinical practice inspection, a good lab practice inspection, whatever. So they could broaden the inspection pretty quick. Again, FDA has the legal authority to conduct inspections at a reasonable time, within reasonable limits, in a reasonable manner, and depends not on consent, but on the validity of the statutory authority. Now, this is from the Food and Cosmetic Act, and then from foreign manufacturers, who, basically, if you want to import products into the United States, if you don't let them inspect your facility, that's where you can get in trouble. That's where the FDA has what's called the delayed denial refusal of an inspection guidance. So quickly, a company, if they refuse an inspection from the FDA could put an import alert in place, which means products made by that company could be refused entry into the country. So there's ramifications mostly on both sides, of domestic and the foreign side as well. So what do they conduct inspection for? Determine how firms control their operations from top management down the line staff. The term around that one is called state of control. Evaluate whether controls meet their GMP requirements. Are you actually doing your GCP requirements or GLP requirements? Are you actually doing and following what the law says? One thing I like to point out here for everybody to understand is, whether it be GMPs, GCPs, or GLPs, those are the bare minimum standards. So I always like to say to companies, are you comfortable with just the bare minimum, or you want to go above and beyond? So keep that in mind as you're saying you comply with GMPs. That complying with GMPs just means you're meeting the bare minimum quality standards for that set of regulations. And determine if your actual practices are consistent and adhere to your established controls. So you're all about adherence to procedures. So you have your quality management system, you have procedures. Are you actually doing what you're saying you're doing consistently all the time? Also do inspections, investigate incidents. You talked about the 4 cause inspections on the prior slide. Is there something going on that they need to come in to actually look at? And then finally, on this one, gather evidence to substantiate violations they uncover. Whether it be, it's an incident they're coming in to do a 4 cause or during a general GMP. It's all about, if they find say a 43 observation, which will be covered in a later slide, do they have the evidence to substantiate that? And keep in mind, FDA is not there to help you. They're not there to solve your problems, although you can't ask questions about your issue. Like Nita and I like to say at the companies all the time, definitely you can have a conversation with your investigator. But ultimately, the bottom line is they're not there to be your quality unit. They expect you to have quality built in through your QMS, all your processes and procedures and personnel. But you can't have those conversations. Investigators are allowed to give you some ideas and thoughts. Now, it's all non-binding. So you can't say, hey, FDA investigator A said this 10 days ago. It's all non-binding, but you can have a conversation, something to consider during your inspection. So what's the unfortunate reality that we see around inspection prep, readiness, and management? So despite a company having the understanding that they need a robust inspection prep and readiness program, things oftentimes unfortunately fall short, which can and does reflect poorly in the actual inspection. So what could happen? Companies can get bogged down in their daily activities of the business and don't focus on being that inspection ready at all times. They can also be consumed on special projects. Again, something to take away from actually working and getting ready for the inspection. Or internal audit programs for companies, or if you use external vendors or consulting companies who do audits for you, tend to be informal, less intense, and focus more on auditing than inspecting. I would argue that your internal audit program needs to actually be just as tough, if not tougher, than an FDA inspection. I consider that, one of those last lines of a defense for a company before an actual inspection. The true inspection prep and readiness supplements the audit program with practice inspection process and behavior training for key personnel. Many companies, inspection prep and readiness becomes a part of their internal audit program. Just built right into it. Again, going back with internal audits, they're not the only thing you need to do to prepare. You must practice your inspection plan for when the real thing actually happens. As with any auditor, if you go into the investigator, you have to, different investigators have different kind of techniques, even though they do follow some standard practices. So you need to be agile, flexible, and adaptable to the inspection. You prepare for it as best you can, but oftentimes, something might come up. You need to be agile around it. And remember, there is no way a robust inspection prep and management program that your company can cover up for poor compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Keep that in mind. It's not a dog and pony show by any means, and there's no way you're going to be able to cover up and try to coast through an inspection. Some more background real quick. So there's a couple different reference documents to call your attention to. We're not going to get into the specifics of each one in depth, but one of the first ones is called the Investigations Operations Manual, or the IOM. Bob investigators call it the Investigator's Bible. It goes into various different areas. It's basically how the investigator, a lot of internal procedures, do different things like sampling, or, actually down to Chapter 5, establishment inspections. So if you haven't seen that, especially trying to work on your improving your inspection readiness programs, definitely take a look at that. The next one is called the Regulatory Procedures Manual. So you remember on the prior slide was the Investigations Operation Manual, and I got the Regulatory Procedures Manual. So think about this more on more compliance side of things. Again, different things like, advisory actions versus judicial actions. So think about an advisory action talks about, a warning letter versus a judicial action is a senior, like a seizure or injunction. And then they got recall procedures and so forth. So this gets more of the either, during or after, after the inspection kind of things, what FDA is doing, but more internal processes and procedures. Next is what's called compliance program guidance manuals. So these, different areas, like for instance, I have up on the screen, the BIMO program, they're compliance programs. So the different programs for different types of inspections. These are very, very good. And the FDA over the past, 5-10 years has, been improving them, revising them, and making, a lot of them, they're adding either checklists or things. But these are, provide instructions primarily to FDA personnel for conducting these different types of inspections. But it also, FDA thankfully makes it available to industry that you can use to actually prepare for your own, you're either preparing your audit program or making sure kind of, making sure you're doing what you're supposed to do in the eyes of the law. So the question is, are you ready for an inspection? So prior planning and practice precludes poor performance. It's something I had a Marine colonel I went to grad school with told me this years ago. I really drilled it into my head. So before inspection occurs, it's highly recommended you have some kind of process and kind of way to practice and go through mock inspections. Like any process, the inspection readiness activities need a plan, which is, how do you execute, how are we going to execute, how are you going to assess, and how are you going to continue to improve. And depending on the size of your company, you could maybe switch things around. For example, so no matter what is the topic of the inspection, GCP, GMP, there shouldn't be too much variation on how the actual inspection process is executed. And we're going to get into more what I mean by that in a minute. So some suggested actions around this. If you already haven't had one, form an inspection support management team that works with your wider organization. Why do we say wider organization? Because, as you know, in any inspection, multiple different stakeholders, subject matter experts, from top management down to line personnel may be called to interact with the investigator. So that's where you need to have that core group of people working with the wider organization to get prepared and practice actually conducting the inspection when it happens. Mentioned it earlier, make sure, strongly suggest your internal audit program, either it's just as tough or tougher than an actual inspection. As they say, you play how you practice. Of course, an inspection can be quite a bit more stressful, busy, and disruptive. But you try to make your audit programs kind of align with that. Can make things and make things run smoother. So behavior inspection. So in years past, a lot of the companies were known to train their employees to give curt answers to a regulator or investigator in hopes that nothing would be revealed in the inspection. It's a flawed approach, oftentimes causing fear and mistrust amongst employees, and could potentially set up that adversarial relationship with the investigator, the regulator. You don't want to have any of these during an inspection. And I can tell you, it's not going to work out well for your company. So practicing the inspection process is one of the best ways to help employees learn appropriate behaviors and response techniques. Again, going back to the internal audits, we keep focusing on this because it's so important. Again, you play how you practice. So you conduct your internal audits, you rely on third parties for inspection prep readiness. How do you get there? So mock inspections is another area to look at. Actually having, instead of your audit, say, we're going to do a mock inspection. So it allows you to practice the inspection And we're going to talk about it's in the front room, back room, and the right behaviors. For example, how readily or quickly can you access documentations that records will be requested during inspection. Kind of role-playing interviewing with the investigator, so forth and so forth. Stuff like that. It's going to be key. During the mock inspection, the inspection team should be, bring in different subject matter experts. Again, the wider part of the organizations that potentially could and would interact with the investigator. Get them ready, doing similar kind of mock practice sessions. So point to consider at the bottom. Over the past several years, regulators have been less apt to want to speak to just supervisors. They'll go directly to a line level or a bench employee. So not only do you need to have your supervisors, managers, and overall leadership teams prepared, it's likely, and I would say it's very likely, that they're not going to be the only ones interacting with the FDA. FDA wants to go down to where actually the work is happening and definitely ask some hard questions. So what elements in your business is being inspected or audited? Bottom line, everything. So procedures, people, facilities, complete records, systems, equipment, labeling, on and on and on and on. So don't assume the investigator will not notice. They'll take everything in the entire picture into consideration when doing an inspection. Again, it's all about assessing the overall state of control of your facility, your facilities, and your company, from top to bottom to top, side to side. So when we mentioned the various inspection team. So the inspection team, think about the front room. Now the front room is where the actions happen. It's where the investigators is going to be doing the inspection, or you maybe, depending on how many investigators show up, you might have to consider doing 2 front rooms. I've actually seen companies where they've had multiple investigators that wanted to have separate, kind of a room by themselves because they want to concentrate. So I've seen 3 front rooms before, believe it or not. So keeping that in mind, especially as you're planning the inspection, and of course the size constraints of your facility, and then how you would address that if there's multiple investigators and they want kind of space. These front row people need, number one, knowledgeable of the facility and your overall quality management system, products, processes, and so forth. You need to have people that are confident. They understand what they're talking about. I call it the been there, done that type of people. They know the information. They know the subject matter. But again, you want to be humble. You don't want to be too cocky because that could come across the wrong way. These people also need to be credible. Again, they know the information, doing the report with the investigator. They're not jerks. Things like that. And they're competent in the materials discussed. So going back, still on the front room, the inspection room also in this firm, it's the focal point where you access documentation, answer questions from the investigator or investigators. Start out, you have some kind of inspection coordinator or a front room host or whatever you want to call it in your organization. They manage the overall inspection process. If you think about you're an investigator, that's the person you want the investigator to either, usually kind of the go-to, kind of like because the investigator or investigators will know they're kind of facilitating kind of the inspection. Now, there's going to be other roles as well, depending on your organization, but this is like the front room lead or the lead for the inspection from your company. Another role is a runner. So what do you mean by a runner? So basically they take the request from the investigator. Hey, I want such and such document or over a period of time, whatever. So they take that request back to the control room, or you call it back room is another way it's called. And depending on your company, it could be something that request comes electronically, verbally, or on paper. And then they get the information to and from the investigator in as quick as time frame as possible. Another role is the escort. So the primary point of contact for the regulator for moving around, if they want to move around the facility or wherever. So if it's not the front room lead, it could be an escort. The escort kind of moves around. Hey, I need to go to the restroom, so I will escort you to the restroom, or I'll escort you to the lunchroom, or wherever they want to do, or I want to take a tour of the facility. So it depends on your organization and your kind of the size, scope, and extent of your inspection prep and management program, how many people you have involved. So escort and the front room host can be the same thing, or if you are able to, You can have more than one person because that kind of frees up the front room person to actually do what they need to do. So moving on. So the key point is, especially with questions, I think Anita will get into some of this. You ask a question, say, I don't know, or I'll find out and I'll get back to you. Never leave if the FDA asks you something or question and you don't try to make anything up. But bottom line, escort and the and or the front room host, you got to have good interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills are key because, again, building rapport is key. Yeah, over time, especially over the course of the investigation. So the scribe takes these notes. The notes are used by the company after the inspection. So hopefully you do not get a 483 observation or observations. But if you do, one example would be like you got an observation, you're trying to remember the context around how the investigator was talking about that observation and the issues or whatever, or who he or she interacted with at what time and whatever. So it helps with that context, and it could actually help you address that better, not only in your response to the 483, but also address it in your overall quality system. So, hey, the investigator was talking about points A, B, and C, and we need to work on A, B, C, D, kind of assessing the overall scope and extent. Mention the back room. So the back room, when kind of you request come in, you get all the documentation together, view the documentation, and so forth. Just like the front room, you should have a back room leader, control room coordinator, back room coordinator, whatever you want to call it. And the backroom staff, usually, or what we suggest is you're going to have quality personnel there because, as you know, during the inspection, there may be a lot of different quality management records that will be covered. Also, technical and operational personnel, and so forth. And this people, log the requests for information coming from the front room or from the tour of the facility, and alert the department heads within the organization. They also help to anticipate and prepare for the next question. So, a good, robust program. You're going to be kind of taking in everything the investigators are talking about and trying to anticipate, hey, they're talking about this subject, but they could potentially get into these areas. So let's be prepared. Number one, because it helps make the inspection a little bit more efficient, but also at the same time, it helps you get the right people engaged, or at least on the ready to come in and be engaged if you know something's going down a certain path. Like, hey, we know we're going to need Jane from engineering to come in and talk on this subject. He's starting to look at this certain investigation or CAPA or something like that. So system owners, subject matter experts, mentioned this. So this personnel who review, I say with backroom assistance, the documentation that will go to the investigator. They also be interviewed by the investigator, but and vice versa. So you want these type of people, for instance, if you're requesting an investigation, stick on that for a second. So the subject matter people are the ones that, could be, multiple different subject matter people, but usually, the people that are worked on an investigation know the subject matter. They can look at it ahead of time, and also if it help prep people if they're going to be interviewed by the investigator. It's also important for people to note the back room is not a party. I've been in back rooms where people just pop in, but then it quickly becomes a bunch of people in a room, and it can become organized chaos, to put it mildly. So that's where the backroom coordinator, or I call it the backroom general at times, keeps things to a minimum in there, a minimum number of people. Make sure you have enough space, of course, but backroom's purpose is to help facilitate what's going on in the front room, because again, the investigator has a finite amount of time, whether it be domestic or foreign inspection, and you want to make your inspection as efficient and effective as possible. And the front room is directly fed by the back room, so you want to make sure the two are in sync. Some other suggestions: have IT support either in the back room with you or on ready to help you if something happens. there's always some kind of IT issue that's bound to come up. I've rarely seen an inspection, where something doesn't come up like that, whether it be can't access a document in some kind of electronic system or whatever, to actually not being able to view the system, because the investigator will likely want to view, say, something within your electronic quality management system, or if your trial master file, or mostly or electronic notes, they might go into your TMFs and stuff like that. So think about it like that. IT is vital for an inspection. And then going back to remote, if they want to do any remote work, like down the line, that's vital as well. So some other suggestions around inspection management. So if you're not already doing it, I suggest conducting some regulatory intelligence. What do we mean by that? So a couple of different points. What are the regulators finding related to your subject matter? What are you are you able to see other 483s from other companies? Or do you have, are you keeping up with, various industry trade press articles and so forth? Basically, what's going on in the industry right now? And then kind of thinking, hey, company A, B, or C had these issues. Do we have the same issues? If you do, it's a good indicator. Number one, use your QMS problem management system to start addressing, investigating, correcting, and preventing, but also help them prepare, because remember, investigators are humans just like we are. They're looking at this stuff as well, and they're preparing, and they could come in with different questions. So again, prior planning precludes poor performance in this aspect. Getting prepared for that and being able, hey, if they ask us this, how would we address it? How can we prove through our quality system that we've actually done something about it? So think it all the way through, and also prepare and practice. The other thing, ask yourself and ask your leadership team and especially your staff, keeps you up at night. What are the items that worries you the most? Don't guess wrong and think they won't be covered on inspection. They likely will. Murphy's Law is very true here, where it'll come up. So being prepared ahead of time, that's the number one proof. How you say if it's an issue, how you've addressed it within your quality system, and hopefully correct and prevented it already and showed it was, whatever you've done was effective. But just being prepared to discuss it. Be prepared to discuss any changes to any process, quality events, or investigations, or anything could also come as well. And collect data and use it to better inform your inspection prep activities and to be prepared to cover our inspection. So it's a continual process. You're continually looking at what's going on right now in the industry, what's going on in our own facility, what kind of issues are happening, what kind of changes are coming up. Do we have changes to a line? Have we put in a new line? If we put in new equipment, and what does that mean to the overall kind of scope and extent of what might be inspected when the investigator shows up? So for those keep me awake at night issues, be prepared to defend whatever actions you may have taken, and have a defense ready in advance. The concept of PowerPoint or storyboards can be a great help here. We actually kind of helps you really think it through and put it in some very succinct points. So here's the issue, kind of what's the situation, what was the task that did something happen, what kind of action you take, what was the results, like how did you correct, prevent, improve it was affected, whatever you were trying to do. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Anita. You've heard enough from me so far. And Anita, I will hand it to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So here today, we're going to talk about the inspection. So one good thing to know is the FDA investigator will be well prepared. They'll research the history of the company, such as your previous inspectional reports, your compliance history, your 483s. They'll also look at various FDA data that has on your company. Some of this includes what they call an establishment inspection report called an EIR, your FDA 483, but they'll also go into deeply reviewing your FDA responses that you've provided. In the previous reports, there could be a physical layout of your facility, your key personnel will be in there, and the results of your last inspection, whether it resulted in a untitled letter, warning letter, or FDA 483 and response. and also validate the closure of the corrective actions from the last inspections. They'll also look at any adverse events such as medical alerts that have come through or any product quality complaints. So you want to manage a robust inspectional process. So you should practice, to Steve's point, how you will perform when an investigator arrives. So some of the things they do is they present their official credentials. The FDA will also provide a notice of inspection, which is a Form 482. That will be presented to the most responsible person at the company. The front and the back room needs to be prepared to go before the investigator arrives. These inspections are often not pre-announced, so you want to have that all prepared, your back room, your files, and what you'll do when the FDA investigator shows up and the team. So in domestic U.S., the FDA routinely does not announce their inspections. Although with the pandemic, they have been pre-announcing to ensure the right for personnel to be present. For foreign companies, they'll typically pre-announce. However, they're starting a pilot for conducting unannounced foreign inspections. So if you're a foreign company that has put in an application and you're getting ready for an inspection or shipping to the United States or a GMP, you should be prepared at any time for the FDA to show up, just as it is for domestic companies. So when they start, they present their FDA credentials. They'll issue the 482 notice of inspection to the most responsible person. And then what you'll want to do is take them to a comfortable area, usually a conference room where there's enough space and good lighting. And you want to conduct an opening meeting. So there should be attendees, key management stakeholders that are at the operations that can escort and lead the inspection for the company. The purpose of the meeting is to give the investigator a better understanding of your on-site operations. This is routinely done via an opening presentation that the company should have pre-designed and prepared and reviewed by your quality organization that you'll present to the investigator. You'll introduce your key personnel during the meeting, which is the opening meeting. You'll have somebody who definitely knows a lot about the company's operations and all the 6 systems to give the opening presentation. The opening presentation should include details that are not limited to your organization. What is your quality control unit structure? What is your manufacturing structure? Who is the highest reporting official up to the CEO? How is your laboratory being run? Is it a micro lab or an analytical lab? They'll also want to see the facility layout map. This includes whether you're doing sterile operations, where are your classified areas. If it's a solid oral dose, where are you receiving materials? Where is your core manufacturing area? Where is your testing area? What is the employee flow? What is the waste flow? So a facility layout map is important, and it should be appropriate size so it's readable. Any additional information that can help the investigator know more about your organization to help facilitate a better inspection. So I can't emphasize here, organization is key for your audit. You want to always be prepared, but you must be organized, because the more organized you are, the more well your inspection usually turns out. The investigator will lead the inspection. You don't want to lead the investigator where they need to go, although you can suggest starting with the facility tour. They may say no, they want to look at particular records if there have been adverse events or complaints or you've had a recent recall. But I would suggest to start with the facility tour. You should also prepare previously during your internal audits and your inspection preparation to do this tour. So you'll know how to conduct it once the investigation team gets there. You don't want to be taking the team in different areas because you haven't pre-prepared a facility tour. The investigator may want to review documents and records prior to the tour specific to the areas they're concerned with seeing based on risk. You can request a daily closeout meeting where the investigator gives you a summary of what they're finding. This will help the site to prepare for the next day. You should also conduct internal closeout meetings with all applicable personnel and discuss what happened that day and what actions are being taken to address any potential observations. So what usually happens is you'll have a series of maybe the investigator might pull 100 records in one day, which is not uncommon. But within those 100 records, they may want follow-up questions answered about their CAPA system, or you have a particular high-risk investigation, or they might want to look at the organizational structures, or you could have had some failures. So they'll ask these follow-up questions. What's good is to discuss and keep good records of what the FDA investigator asked for, so you can prepare for those questions that are going to come the next day. You'll also be given a final closeout meeting, usually in most cases at the end of the inspection, and that should be held. You should respond to any observations or deficiencies within 15 business days. That is critical. So more about deep diving into the actual inspection, more about the facility tour. So, inspection is not just about records. It's about how the agency evaluates your facility real time with direct observation. And a lot of this is covered, not all of it, but a lot of it is covered during the facility tour. So when they're touring, they can see many GMP issues, or they can see a company that's running in great compliance. It provides an investigator with an overview of the facility. You should always escort the investigator team. You should have a scribe, a department head to accompany the investigator in case there are any questions. A designated lead should lead and participate in the tour. It can be the facility manager or operations manager, the senior quality manager in charge, and also expect questions during the tour. So what I usually suggest is that you have the director of quality or somebody in a high or mid-level quality position, and also have someone that can answer direct questions about the manufacturing operations of the facility. And you should pre-prepare while preparing for the tour of the facility, and also prepare during your internal audits on how you will handle some difficult questions that could come through during the initial tour. So tour is part of the inspection. It's really inspecting the facility. So interviews are critical. FDA employee interactions can be highly technical. They are highly, highly trained in the area they're inspecting, and their questions can become very technical. And it's important to remember that the application, like a ANDA or a BLA or even a supplement, is reviewed. However, on inspection, the investigator will have knowledge of that application, and then they want to see how your company's operating in a validated state and manufacturing product that's put on the market. So that can lead to some very highly technical questions about your release, about how you handle your problems, about issues you've had in the company, about your QMS system. So you have to be well prepared for handling FDA interviews and highly technical questions. Be sure the staff knows how to interact. Always be honest. Get comfortable with silence. You don't have to fill it in. So quite often, sometimes the investigator will need, or the team will need, time to look at 10 documents. So there may be silence in the room. It's critical that you don't try to fill in that space, and you give the investigator time to read what they're looking at. And noise control is a good thing to have. It's okay, and actually the best case, to say, I don't know. Let me get the appropriate individual or SOP to respond. Because what you say on or during an inspection can be used on a 483 if you don't seem knowledgeable about what you're talking about, because there is a training regulation that they can cite under. So it's important to say, I don't know, because that will help to show the agency that you're driving your quality, you have responsible individuals at the site, and that you're pushing your patient safety. So if you say something like, you don't understand what a dilution failure is, you don't understand what an EM or PM is, you're not understanding what a continuous process verification and that data looks like, or statistical analysis, you want to call those professionals that you have on site to answer the question. And it's better to wait, get the question, and find the knowledgeable individual that can provide that information to the agency. So avoid speculative language. I think it might be maybe that really shows that you don't know what you don't know, and you need to get the appropriate individual. And take the time to do that. Conduct interviews with a scribe present. It's also important to know there's a specific amount of time, especially on foreign inspections, with how long an inspection can last. Of course, if it's an official action indicated, and Steve will get into that, the inspection can go longer. However, there is a time that they're going to be there. So you want to be able to answer these questions adequately in a good and efficient amount of time, so the team can look at enough documentation to give an opinion on how your operations are in control. Data integrity is very, very critical. Data integrity refers to consistency, accuracy. It's collected and maintained through the entire life cycle of a product. It should also be at core value as it applies to every area of your pharmaceutical compliance performance. It is one of the most important facets of design implementation, and it affects everything from minute business actions all the way up to core values of the company. The importance of data integrity cannot be stressed enough with the recent implementation of automated systems and electronic record keeping. So data integrity in itself, to me, is a sub-inspection. So the FDA can go through all 6 systems, and also any of your application data that you've submitted around stability, your adverse events, med watches, and to assess data integrity all the way down to your logbooks in the manufacturing area, which are often neglected. They will also assess data integrity real time by watching how the analyst performs a specific method, how they document it in the logbook, how they're filling things out, whether they're swiping in and out their card to get into areas. And with data integrity, there's always an audit trail. There's an electronic file. There are paper trails. They can question about missing data. So data integrity in itself needs preparation and inspection readiness. And they will go very deeply into this area to show that your company is in compliance. So we're going to dive a little bit into ACOA and the meaning of it. So we have attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And so if we look in the section of the 21 CFR reference, we'll see there's multiple citations under the Code of Federal Regulations that go around these areas, and they can also cross each other. So it's a system. You have to make sure attributable. All data generated or collected must be attributable to the person generating the data. So what I've often seen in records, I know Steve has seen that when he's reviewed, is a record may be filled out by one person, and then you can see a handwriting change or a color change, and it's filled out by another person, or signed an initial by 2 people, where you can't read the initials. So you need to know that it can be traced back to a particular individual that's filled out the data. It can also be electronically stamped and has to follow the Part 11 requirements. It has to be legible. So quite often you'll see records that are not legible, they're not readable, they're not all signed, the handwriting is not readable. So really that's a record of your data that supports your releasing of a product. So it's important that it's legible. And since company officials often retire or move on, we need to have a record of who did what, and it needs to be permanent, meaning it shouldn't be in unindelible ink. It shouldn't be smudge. It shouldn't be in pencil. It shouldn't be in purple colors. So this is something, the importance of caring, especially for records that are hand filled out. It has to be contemporaneous. And what does that mean? That the measurements in the data and record are recorded at the time the work is performed. So there's no pre-filling out documentation. This is one area FDA will do a direct observation. Are your batch records contemporaneous? Are they being filled out at the time the batch in the phase is being made? The batch record is a snapshot of what happened during the manufacturing. So it's important that those results and measurement and data are recorded at the time the work is performed. If there are spaces that are left unfilled, and you find out, or you have a quality manager that should be doing their due diligence of going through these batch records, and you find something that's not filled out, don't fill it out after the fact. That can be caught. you want to cross it out, initial it, and date it per the USP, make an annotation. If a deviation needs to be raised, raise it, because sometimes that occurs. Now, it shouldn't be trended. We shouldn't see a lot of that in a company. However, if it does happen, do not go back and backfill. It has to be original. Original data, sometimes referred to the source data or primary data, the medium in which the data points is recorded for the first time. So what is electronic data? So we have dynamic data, that's the original data that can be stored on an electronic server, computer. However, we have printout data. That could be original data, the printout, if the printout is not the electronic data stored on a computer system. Or it could be original data where it's written out, right? So your original record is hand filled out. So there are different interpretations of what is original. However, you must provide the original record. Quite often in inspections, you'll have the investigators, they'll ask for records, you'll provide copies of records or printouts of records, but FDA can ask for the original record, the original wet signed record. You should always keep the original record, and that would be the original record in that case. So the different forms of original records, FDA will come in, they'll say, what is your original record? You should be able to answer that question and provide that record in a good amount of time. It has to be accurate, complete, consistent, truthful, and representative of the facts. So if any of these areas, which it may seem there's many different interpretations, are not there, but they do have what a COLA means, and we often see a COLA plus, you'll see there's many references here that you can be cited for. So it's very important that the data integrity for inspections is adequate, because if it's not, and Steve will go into that, that will often lead to an OAI inspection. So the agency and the investigator team, and sometimes they'll call the chemist, can take samples and pictures. Samples, FDA samples, are for purpose and they're not randomly taken. If requested, FDA must generally provide the company with a portion of their sample. Companies should take their own sample at the time and place the FDA does, and they should request a copy of the test results. So an investigator or FDA can request samples. The samples can be taken by the company and then provided to the FDA, and then they'll give you a receipt for sample. However, when you take the sample or FDA asks you to take a sample, you should take at least 3 times the amount of the sample or more, so that if you need to send it to a third-party lab, when you get the results from the FDA, you can do that, or you can run your own analysis, or some companies will run their own analysis, and they'll also get a contract testing facility to validate the results. So it's important that you have enough of the sample to test yourself. And also, you don't want to have to test your retains, because retains are kept for specific reasons. You have to check your retains annually. You also you may have a recall, or you may have a serious adverse event or death. So you should have enough for your retains. And that's why it's important, if FDA asks you to take samples, that you take enough that you can also test yourself. The FDA investigator team will often ask for pictures. You must have a company policy on investigators taking photographs. They are permitted to take pictures. You should take the identical picture that the FDA takes. Sometimes the FDA will tell you to take the picture for them, and then you'll have the original picture, and then you provide them with the electronic data file and also a printout of the picture, or they can take the pictures themselves, and you should take the identical picture at the time. You may want to take additional pictures as well, and if the company policy prohibits photographs, be sure to clearly state that. But in most cases, FDA is permitted to take photos. So what is recordings and affidavits? So oftentimes you get this question a lot, especially even when companies are meeting with the FDA for regulatory meetings, or they're meeting for submissions, tape recordings. The FDA does not ask to record interviews. You should have a company policy in the event they do. Obtain advice from legal counsel, and do not tape the FDA without their knowledge. And usually that's not permittable, but I will leave that to Steve if he could catch up on that. So affidavits is another area. You should have a company policy to address affidavits. whether the FDA investigator is writing an affidavit. They are permitted to write their affidavit. What do you do if the investigator asks you to read the affidavit, annotate the affidavit, sign the affidavit? You must follow your company policy, and you should have a company policy for affidavits before it occurs. Oftentimes, companies have the high-level policies or procedures for lot release, expiration date, recall, but they often don't have a procedure in place for affidavits. And you don't want to be handling, what should I do with an affidavit when asked if you're not prepared for it? FDA usually will not review financial data, sales data, or pricing data. FDA per policy does not request internal audit records, but other regulatory bodies can globally. The Form 483 is a statement of the investigator's observations. The FDA 483 is issued to the firm at the conclusion of the inspection and has observed many conditions. In the judgment, they may consider violations of the FD&C Act. The 483 notifies management of objectionable conditions. The 483 is not intended to be all-inclusive of every possible deviation from the law or regulation. So you'll receive, if you're domestic, you'll receive the FDA 482 notice of inspection at the beginning of the inspection. If you're international, you don't get a 482, but you do get credentials presented if you're domestic and if you're international. You may get a request for a sample. You'll get a receipt for them taking any samples. Also, you may have a request for labeling, and labeling would be under a doc sample. We won't get too much into that. However, if they find objectionable conditions, any objectionable conditions in your facility, you'll receive a Form 483. So the Form 483 is written by the investigator team, reviewed by compliance, and it notifies you of objectionable conditions. What companies often fail to realize that it's not intended to be all-inclusive. So to the point that the FDA is not your quality control unit, they're there for maybe 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes longer, but they're not there for 2 years. So they won't find every possible deviation. So when you get an observation, it's important that you look holistically at your systems and all of the gaps when you respond, so you can show that that area is in a state of control. So what companies like to do is just address the one observation for the one record at that one time in that one system. And that's really not a proper way to address the 483. You want to systematically look at it and thoroughly investigate it yourself internally and write a robust response within 15 days. So what happens after the issuance of the 483? The FDA investigator observation is reviewed. The FDA 483 is reviewed for the establishment inspection report along with all evidence to collect it on site, and any responses made by the firm and submitted no later than 15 business days after the inspection. So the inspection can be classified as no action indicated. That means you have no observations, or voluntary action indicated, where you have observations, 483s. However, you have provided in response and you're showing that you're voluntarily fixing your corrective actions and driving your compliance, or it can be considered OAI, official action indicated. And so we'll get into that later. I want to thank you today, and I have to pass it to Steve now.
Hi again, everybody. So kind of wrapping up what Anita was talking about on the various kind of classifications. So again, ultimately, as a company, your goal should be no action indicated. You know what I mean? So, but does no action indicated by the FDA mean you don't have issues and problems? My opinion is absolutely not. Everybody has issues. It's how you deal with the issues. So going into voluntary action indicated for, multiple FDA personnel over years when they're doing presentations. And there might actually be some documentation somewhere out there. I just don't know where it is. But it's somewhere like 60 to 70% of our industry is at a VAI status. You think, oh my God, is that really true? Absolutely, it is. And it's because people have issues. And then, of course, how are you dealing with it within in your overall quality system? Again, people get 483 observations. I mean, investigator comes in or auditor comes in, they're looking at things. There might be gaps and improvement opportunities. The name of the game in our industry is continual improvement to make sure you make a fit for use product, a quality product for the patients that depend upon your medicine or device or biologic, whatever it may be. And then in that official action indicated status, it's usually, the FDA usually, and they say they don't have to follow, they can go to any different thing, whether if you remember we talking about earlier in the presentation, an advisory action versus judicial action. So FDA can go straight to a consent decree if the problem is, so the problems that you have are so egregious. But usually they follow, think of it like a compliance ladder. If you start out, you have an OAI, you may have a formal regulatory meeting with the FDA. Then the next step could be an untitled letter. But usually you get into a warning letter. They have been less apt to send untitled letters, or put it this way, warning letters are publicly available, untitled letters are not. So we're seeing more and more, there's more warning letters out there now. So you go to a warning letter. Then the next stage could be, then you get into the judicial actions. If you're a foreign company, it could be an import alert. Hey, you already got a warning letter. We've told you have issues. Now we still have issues when they come out and do a warning letter reinspection. So the next step could be, hey, we don't really trust your products to come into the United States. So we're going to basically stop them from coming across our border. Or in domestic and even international. There's been international into the consent decree or injunction area. I call that a court-ordered quality improvement plan. Hey, FDA says we've told you multiple times you have big systemic issues across your operations. We're not seeing that you're taking prompt, voluntary, corrective, and preventative action. Talked to you multiple times. We've had the meeting. We've had a warning letter. We've had or maybe another meeting. But now you're about multiple inspections. Now it might be time to take it over to the judicial side and get the judiciary involved and put an injunction or a consent decree in place. And finally, the other thing they could do as well is they could seize your product. Bring out the U.S. Marshal. The Marshal shows up at your front door and basically seizes your product. Is another action. So, is not something you want. And then, having a good, robust quality management system promptly corrects, voluntarily and promptly corrects issues, and continually works to improve your process, products, and services is where you want to be. So some hot topics. Quality culture. It's something you've seen. A lot of the regulators have been either discussing, putting out information on, as well as trade groups and other industry trade groups like the Parenteral Drug Association, the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, ARISP, have done a lot of work around quality culture. So it's basically, a good, I like a good definition out there right now is from the group called the Pharmaceutical Inspections Cooperative Scheme, or PICS. So PICS is a group of inspectorates of multiple global health authorities. It's well over 60 different countries, including the United States. Came out in a pretty good definition of it. So what is it? I'm going to read it for you. So management should aim to create a work environment, quality culture that is transparent and open, one in which personnel are encouraged to freely communicate failures and mistakes. Call that a speak-up culture. An organizational reporting structure should permit the information flow between personnel at all levels. So not only from top-down leadership down to the line, but also encourage have the line, people from the line speak up. So you think about that last aspect. What do you use to see the problems first? It's the people actually on the line doing the work, manufacturing a product, or QC lab or wherever it may be. But also, those are also the same people that probably are the best people you want to talk to figure out, hey, what do we need to do to improve our process, products, and services, to make sure we're doing what we need to do in the eyes of the law. So think about, quality culture starts with leadership. Leadership sets the tone 150%. And you'll see different regulators come in and kind of assess it. So when I mentioned state of control, one of the things you assess, and I would say your audit group needs to do the same thing, or if you have consultants doing the same thing, is how does the interactions between the leadership all the way to the line level and line level back and forth. And you can see a lot of different indicators around that. So then from leadership, hopefully you don't have this, but I would consider a bad quality culture is it somewhere where you're cutting corners all the time. And then cutting corners equates to trying to get things done faster and sloppier, and you have problems. And then you have problems and you don't deal with them well. I would argue that's not the kind of quality culture you want to have in an organization. Versus you're raising issues in a transparent fashion. You have good flow of communication, top to bottom, bottom to top, side to side. People are able to raise ideas and thoughts, but also at the same time, you deal with them within the guise of your quality management system. So you have an issue or you want to make a change. Just go down the change aspect. So you want to make a change, whether it be an improvement, maybe a new piece of equipment. Are you putting a change control in place? Are you assessing the change? What does this mean? Do we need to, of course, we do your qualification? Is a calibration involved? This is a lab equipment. How does it affect your methods? On and on and on. So all that, and then also, how does it is regulatory affairs involved? Are they assessing it from, hey, we have applications in house for this product. This new piece of equipment could affect the application, and we need to figure out, do we need to supplement it, or the application to give the various regulators different type of data and information and get approved before we even do anything. So then all the way down the line, and are you managing that process for your change management system to ultimately you get to the ultimate stage where you make that change wherever it may be, in this case, like a new piece of equipment is put in place and all the different variables. So you're doing it right versus you cutting corners. For that. Hybrid inspections. It's something you've been around for a while, but something to continue to keep in mind. So be ready for them. The regulator may start an inspection or requesting documents or records ahead of time, or they may start an inspection, then go off-site and request documents or conduct interviews off-site. There's multiple different ways that investigations occur. So you have to be ready for different variables. Going back to earlier in the presentation, you got to be agile during an inspection because different things happen. So some good practices for remote inspections. Have key documents already prepared and ready to go in electronic format. Do you have a share pool for these documents, or can you readily pull them, preferably from your electronic QMS? And do you have them ready to present to the investigator? Again, your inspection prep process should cover this, but it's something to consider if you're not already doing that. And then make sure your Wi-Fi throughout the facility is strong. Yes, I've seen it in the past, more so in the pandemic, but it's still going on. You might have to do a video tour, walking the regulator through the various parts of the facility. So if you get into a compounding room in your facility and you don't have good Wi-Fi and it keeps going in and out, it kind of belabors the inspection. It could annoy the investigator, and then of course you could bring up more questions. So it's again, prior planning includes poor performance here on that one. And the whole concept of the compliance curve is something to consider. So the cost of we call it over or under compliance is usually unstable, resulting in vicious cycles of overcorrection. So this is a slide that one of my colleagues, Sneep, has been using for years, and I love it. So you start at the top, where actually you see that solid black line on all the different graphs. That's adherence to the CFRs. Remember, GMP, GCP, whatever, it's bare minimum standard or quality standard you're following. So urban legend compliances, you have no problems. Everything's above board. So good compliance, again, like I said, this could either be one of those NAI inspections or VAI. And you got VAI in this case because you have a couple, got some 483s. But good compliance is you're actively addressing what's coming up, whether it be problems coming up that are self-identified or through your own internal audit, or in this case on screen is the 483 observations. But you are, for instance, investigating what it is, you're determining a root cause or a root cause is, and those root causes of whatever that issue may be are thoroughly addressed through thorough corrective and preventative actions. And ultimately, how do you prove that what you're putting in place to correct and prevent are effective? So that's what I consider good compliance. Now, out of compliance, again, warning letters, consent decrees, lost money and all that. It's not a place where you want to be. Is where companies go real deep and stay deep. And at the beginning, we say overcorrection because you get a lot of times companies you have an issue and they completely overcorrect to one side. So the pendulum swings to one side. And then over time, I call it the compliance roller coaster. So they overcorrect, they sustain, say they have unfortunately they get a warning letter or something, they overcorrect. So they have, expended a whole bunch of budgetary resources, hired a lot of new people, on and on and on to whatever correct and prevent whatever issues you want. And then they sustain for a while. And then executive leadership, it's a business. You have to, businesses are there. You know how to make product, but you have to make money. So you'll see things budgets start getting cut, and they start going down again. So it goes down the slope of the roller coaster. And then it gets down to the bottom again, where a regulator, FDA, or another health authority comes in and sees big problems again. And then all of a sudden you have the overcorrection cycle again. So the compliance roller coaster starts going back up the hill before it's sustained. So the goal is to get into that middle form where stuff happens. So how do you deal with it? Are you dealing it within the quality system? Are you documenting in a transparent manner? I used to work for a company where the founder of the company had a saying called "Sunshine purifies." So are you bringing out in that transparent sunshine? Everybody sees it, and you start to work on it, and you fix and correct the problems over time. And kind of, you're going to have issues. Everybody does. It's just a fact of life, and then trying to stay above board. So in conclusion, we argue that a robust inspection management program process, so readiness, practice, actually conducting the inspection, helps to ensure, one, the inspection process runs smoother. Number two, decreases the likelihood of inspection observations. Again, it shows that you're in control. If you're showing control not only through your quality system, but in your inspection, it shows overall control of your organization. It just helps you show better. And third, it helps you to groom your organization as associates for a higher level of future performance. So with that said, I thank you for your time and attention. And Mike, I'm going to hand it back to you for questions.
Thanks, Anita and Steve, for your excellent presentation. I'd like to remind everyone that if you have any questions for Anita and Steve, please type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can. We do have a few questions in. So our first question is, will an FDA inspector ask about a product which is out of the audit scope if those products are manufactured in the same manufacturing area? And I guess the person goes on, how would you deal with this if there are other products which are not under the audit scope? Would you need to show any documents, etc.? So Anita and Steve, any comments on that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll kick it off and then I'll hand it over to Anita. So I guess the first question I would have for the person asking the question is, are we talking about a domestic or international site? If it's international, the scope would be what products are coming into the United States. So with that said, FDA, when they do an inspection, it depends on the type of inspection. Like we mentioned, is it like a pre-approval, pre-license inspection, general GMP? But for the most part, and I'm very interested to hear what Anita says since she's done hundreds of inspections, all products that are in the United States are fair game. So depending if they're coming and looking at one line, they could expand it to other lines depending on what they're finding. But in my experience, you want to be prepared for them to not only cover, say, it's a pre-approval inspection, but just be ready to have them cover everything. Because remember, we're talking, they do more system level inspections, like we talked about the 6 systems earlier in the presentation, like the quality system, production system, lab control system, materials, and then of course packaging, labeling, and so forth. So they're looking at systems. So all the systems are interconnected, number one. And number two, all the products within all those lines are interconnected too. So something that you might have an investigation for one product on one line, you might have to expand it to other lines in your facility and so forth. Anita, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that, Steve. You want to also be concerned about some of the high-risk patient safety issues for cross-contamination, whether you have a dedicated line or a shared line with the cleaning products you're putting, cleaning validation for the products you're putting through each of the line. If you're using that equipment in the laboratory to test, if the equipment has an issue, then even if you test a product not going to the United States or not under an application or not in the FDA arena, if that equipment has an issue and it needs an investigation and you're doing commercial marketed product for the FDA, your investigation should cover and cross those areas as well. And then you need to look at holistically your CAPA system. So yes, the FDA can inspect other products that may impact the marketed product that the FDA regulates if there's a patient safety issue. And that's a wide range. So to Steve's point, you want to make sure all your 6 systems are in control, that you push forward with your risk mitigation and risk management to see what other products may cause some impact on the marketed product for patients under the FDA regulations, and then do your due diligence if you have issues in those areas.
Excellent. Thank you both for your answer. Let's move on to our next question. Steve and Anita, our next question is, what are the most common gaps companies overlook when preparing for an FDA inspection? Would either of you kindly chime in on that?
Sure, yeah, I'll start again. I think one thing is not practicing, actually. And what I mean not practicing is, whether it be FDA or another regulator, once the inspection starts, that's when people's emotions get worked up, people get nervous, anxious, and everything. So practicing ahead of time. For instance, one key area to practice is, the agency is going to want to talk to your subject matter experts, whatever subject matter, whether it be like a lab investigation or something involving quality system production. So knowing and having key list of SMEs that are going to be involved in the inspection, having them prepared on what could be talked about, whether it be key kind of investigations or key processes, if it's a production area or a lab area or whatever it may be, and actually practice, sit down and practice, and to ask those tough questions, knowing that the agency through their interviewing techniques could really work somebody up and get pretty anxious. But practicing ahead of time is a key area that I see a lot of companies either do a little of and they should do more, or they don't do it at all. Just thinking everything will be fine when the inspection starts. And then we all know, there's always curveballs that various regulators or even auditors will throw at you. So that's one thing to think about. And Nita, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yes. So some of the areas that companies overlook while preparing for an FDA inspection is realizing that this inspection can come anytime, including domestic and international. So to Steve's point, you must always pre-prepare. Having your repository room and your records readily available for what reports will fall under the regulatory and compliance programs for the 211s and other areas that you may be producing under. And then having items that kind of don't close in a timely manner. For instance, deviations, investigations usually may not be thorough because companies are rushing to get it completed. That will be assessed. Open CAPAs left for a long time, not tracking and trending and implementing corrective actions appropriately. And also the complaint handling system, looking at your adverse event reporting, as well as your product quality issues and the retained sampling. So to the point of the presentation, the 6 systems, and when you prepare for your 6 systems, go through that. You should be practicing and conducting your own internal audit program and putting corrective actions where they need to be. And it's a great idea to have a third party come in and do a mock audit and mock FDA audit so you can pressure test those areas and really prepare with organization, because all of that is under the scrutiny when you are initiated a 482 notice of inspection and you don't know it's coming. So I always drive inspection readiness all the time, 365 days, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and I would say one thing just to have, if you don't have it, evidence, inspection prep readiness and management, or at least an inspection management SOP that everybody's trained to. And that's usually a trigger to get people thinking about it. And then multiple other things that Anita and I just talked about. Something to think about.
Excellent. Thanks again, both of you, for your in-depth answer. Let's move on. We have another question here. Does the FDA have any guidelines for the use of, rapid microbial methods for non-sterile products?
Off of the top of my head, I can't think of anything. But they do have information about aseptic practice and a lot of other things. So I would suggest looking at their website. And I know other trade organizations have documentation as well. Anita, you may have more information than I have, but I just can't think of anything right now.
Sure, the USP will go into testing for non-sterile products. And you want to make sure, if you're using any kind of micro rapid methodology, that it is equivalent or better to the USP and that it's validated across your product lines. There is a guidance document now out for microbiology for non-sterile products. It's still in draft, and we can provide that, Mike, as a review for this question. But to Steve's point, that should be assessed and risk analysis.
Yeah, one thing to add on that is, if you are, USP definitely has some information, but the guidance Anita mentioned has been out for a couple of years, but take a look at that if you haven't already. But if you're an application product, one thing to think about is if you're considering starting to utilize rapid micro methods, which there are getting to be more and more out on the market nowadays. It would be good to reach out to your project manager in the review office, whether it be Cedar's office of new drugs or if it's a CBER office as well, wherever it may be, and try to open up a dialogue with them as well, and go from there. And I think that's a good starting point. Of course, before doing that, having all your ducks in a row. Here's the test we want to do. Here's how we want to use it. Here's what product or products we want to use it on. And if you have, preferably before you go in front of the FDA or another regulator, having information and data, like, hey, we've started looking at it, and here's some of our some initial studies and outcomes we've seen, and going from there.
Excellent. Thanks again. Okay, just a reminder, if anyone has any questions for Anita or Steve, to please type them in. We'll get to as many as we can. Our next question is, can the FDA refer to external regulation where in the US FDA guidelines are not very detailed or clear, and how much is there room for interpretation when an observation is pointed out?
It's a good question. FDA has to rely on, of course, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and the 21 CFRs, whether it be 210, 211, or getting into the bylaws inside in the 600s, and the 1271s for tissue, and on and on and on, and the 820s and for CDRH. So that's what they rely on. And they're, my answer to that is they need to rely on that. Now, the company, you as a company, can refer to some of these things if you're trying to support a response or some kind of data element in a response. But FDA really has to rely on the law, bottom line. But at the same time, if you look at the regulations, as you pointed out in your question, there's some specificity, but there's a lot of, I call it gray. So there's areas, and that's where the C in CGMP comes into play. For instance, remember FDA seeing all the other inspections they're doing, they may see something that a company's doing over time, and they consider, hey, this is the current practice in the industry. Why aren't you doing it? So that's where you can being up to speed on what's going on in the industry is going to be key for you. So bottom line, stick with the law, but it can go broad and wide as well. Anita, what do you think? What did I miss?
No, I think that's exactly right. And also, Steve, the regulatory intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you both for your answer. I appreciate it. Our next question is, I guess, a follow-up to our previous question about other products. And so if the product is manufactured on another manufacturing line, which is not under FDA inspection, is it auditable to the auditor, and will the QMS be checked by an inspector if both manufacturing lines are on the same plant?
I'm reading the question again, Mike. I think, bottom line, yes, it's all fair game for the FDA, especially if those products are either being made in the U.S. or being imported in the United States. And as you pointed out, the QMS covers your entire quality management system, all your operations. So I think it's all fair game. I think the only kind of exception that would pop into my mind is if that other line is not something that's making commercial products. So if it's some other non-approved product yet, or for another country, not U.S., is one kind of thing that could potentially mitigate that area from being covered. Otherwise, I think it's all fair game. Anita, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. Some examples would be label mix-ups, or you could get cross-contamination, or you could get people moving from each line without following GMPs, a lack of staging, a lack of charging, that can impact the product. So it is all fair game, especially when it comes to patient risk and their assessing.
Excellent. Thanks again. All right, let's move on to our next question. What are the key elements of a strong corrective and preventive action plan post-inspection?
Sure, that's a good question as well. The first two words that come to mind for this one is deep and wide. So let's just assume you get a form for FDA 483. So you got a list of observations from the investigator. Remember, those are the statement of the investigator's observation. It's not considered official agency policy. What I mean by that is, the process goes back into the center, whether it be CBER, or CDRH. They make the assessment, and then, of course, the ultimate, they make the OAI, VAI, or NAI decision on the outcome of the inspection classification. So let's say you put in your response. Again, answer the observations right in front of you. So go deep on that. What is the investigator? And when they read, stepping back, when you get your 483, if you don't understand it, ask. Or if there's different specific questions, talk about it. So because you want to get as much information from the investigator as possible on what his or her thoughts were for that observation. And that's your chance to do it. Say, what are you talking about? Help me understand this a little bit better, so they can kind of walk you through. And hopefully before that, as the inspection's going on, you're asking for at least daily closeout meetings where they're having the investigators talking about, hey, I'm seeing this, or I'm seeing that, and kind of so you have an understanding before they actually present the 483. But when I say deep and wide as well, think about the metaphor, I think it's a metaphor, what's called a horse with blinders. So you have an observation. So think about a horse with blinders. Why do they have the blinders on? They're going just to keep them going forward, and not look side to side and get spooked by something, in their peripheral vision. So you're moving down straight. So a lot of companies I call it like that horse with blinders kind of approach, where they just go right forward with what's right in front of them in the observation. But in these type of situations, you got to take the blinders off and you have to look around. So, for instance, question going back to different manufacturing lines. If there is an observation pertaining to one line or one product on one line, think about well, our other lines, could they be affected? Is there something else, that could potentially be? Is it a system, more of a systemic issue that it covers all of our lines, or is it just that one? And if it's just that one, then explain it. And it's just this problem is only on this line because ABC 1, 2, 3. So don't assume the FDA is going to know that, because remember, again, the investigator did the inspection, but the center's making the classification. So you want to be able to explain it for the center personnel that are reviewing your observation, your response, and all that. So I think that's some key things to think about. And then the other thing that pops in my mind is just timeliness. If you have a corrective action plan in place, look at the timeliness on when you're actually going to get these corrections or preventions implemented. For instance, if you say, hey, FDA, we're going to revise SOP 1, 2, 3 ABC. And you say, but hey, it's going to take us 6 months to update this SOP. Now, number one, the complexity of the matter can come into play. So if it is something that's going to take a while to get updated, so it's a highly complex procedure, you're going to have to train, and it's going to take 6 months to get it implemented because you have to train or whatever. Explain that in the response, so you have it. But if it's something that's simple, you don't want the FDA thinking when they're reading this that it doesn't take that long to update an SOP. Or situations like that. Anita, I'm going to hand it over to you. That's all I can think about right now.
Sure. I mean, that's you want. So this is where taking your minute notes and taking your scribe notes during an inspection becomes important. You'll receive, to Steve's point, an FDA 483. You want to put investigations and CAPAs around the areas that speak to those 483s. But even when you're addressing your 483, you want to holistically look at the problem, and you definitely want to drive your quality systems application. And that's really where it's at. And how can you make sure that you systematically handle your issues, that it's documented to a regulatory and compliance status per the GMPs, and that you're effectively reducing the rate of repetitiveness. And so that can be across multiple 483s as checks. So to your point, to the person who asked the question, the corrective actions, the preventive actions, and your holistic approach to the life cycle of the product does not stop at the inspection. You can gain a lot of good knowledge from the inspection and improve your quality systems robustly and provide a very detailed and above board response to the agency.
And Mike, one other thing to add, Anita starts talking and I start thinking about other stuff, so I apologize. Talking about corrective action plan, make sure you assess, number one, you should have it in your procedure somewhere where what requires an effectiveness check. When do we have to check to make sure whatever we're doing to correct or prevent is actually effective? So make sure that's outlined in your procedure. That's an easy kind of hit for an investigator or an auditor. And then with these things, determining which corrective and preventions need to actually have an effectiveness check, and also when you're going to do it, the timeliness as well, are two other things to consider, especially in these situations.
Excellent. Thank you for your answer to that question. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for our webinar today. We'd like to thank both Anita and Steve for your presentation and answering all of our questions. Any questions that were unanswered will be answered after the webinar via email. As I said, we'd like to thank Anita and Steve for their presentations today. We'd also like to thank Regulatory Compliance Associates, a Nelson Labs company, for sponsoring today's webinar. We will also be sending out an email with a link to this webinar so that you can view it offline at your leisure, and we'll allow you to share the link with your colleagues so they can view it as well. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.